Hello, my name is Ricky Snyder, and I'm going to be talking about FERPA today, and this is for USD 308. FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it was established in 1974. And the reason that it was established was to help protect the rights of students' individual records and information about them. The purpose of FERPA, like we talked about, was to protect the privacy of student education rights. It was also to establish the rights of students to inspect and review their education records so that if they had a problem with something that had happened in the past, they could go back and make sure that it was accurate. And that kind of leads into the third step there, which is to provide guidelines for correction of inaccurate and misleading data through informal and formal hearings, so that if something got skewed along the way, that there is a certain steps that you can go back through to correct some mistakes that may have changed what you actually came up with. First thing that you need to know is what educational records is. You must, as an educator or a person that works within a district, you must strive to really protect these records. And some of these things might include, but are not limited to, things like date and place of birth. Grades. You are not allowed to discuss grades with anybody unless they have written consent, which we'll get to later. But you can't sit here and talk to some parent about, oh yeah, these grades aren't very good of your good daughter's friend over here. You cannot also discuss test scores except with that particular individual. You also may not discuss disciplinary records, how many times somebody's been in trouble, things like that. You may not do that. You cannot discuss that unless there is a written consent. Another thing you need to understand, what is directory information. Now this is information that can be made public. They gave the example a couple of times, things that you might find in a yearbook or a sports program. Things such as name and address and telephone number, height, weight. Those are the kinds of things that can be made public without having to worry about the legal ramifications that may come from it. What responsibility do you have as educators teaching here at USD 308? First of all, you are legally and ethically bound to protect student information. And that is a very big thing. You don't want to jeopardize somebody's career or somebody's future down the road because you made a mistake and didn't protect the student information that was so important. And if you think, it's not that big of a deal, I'm not going to comply to this, and what would happen? Well, obviously it might hurt your career, but it also can cause loss of federal funding for the district that you are working for if you decide to not comply with the rules that FERPA has enforced. How can someone gain access? You must have a signed written consent in order to gain access to these educational records. That is generally given to the parents, so parents have all access to this information until the child turns 18. Once they turn 18, then all that access is turned over to the child, and we all have those parents who want to be involved, but actually once the child turns 18 they are in charge, and parents must have written consent in order to gain access to, for example, a student's grades. They can't email a teacher when the student turns 18 if they're a senior in high school and say, hey, what is my son or daughter doing, or how are they doing in your class? They have to have written consent in order to gain access to this information. Once the student goes on to, let's say, higher education, then they also still have the obligation to the information being turned over to them, and the parents cannot get that unless there is written consent. So those written consent forms are very important to have, and you must know that you have those on file if you want to share any educational record information with them. So now we're going to look at a couple of scenarios and decide how you would handle it, or how would be the best way to handle it. So here's the first scenario that I have. A parent comes in to complain about Susie Q bullying their daughter. The parent demands to know what you are doing as a teacher to punish Susie Q and how you plan on dealing with further incidents down the road. What would be the best response in this situation? I would say that one of the best responses you can do is talk to the parent about the importance and how much you care about their child. and stress to them that you are only here to discuss their child and what you can do with their child. You cannot discuss other students because you are legally and ethically bound by FERPA. And if they need to know what FERPA is, you can refer them back and kind of explain to them what that is, but that you want what's best for all children, and that explain to them that that's what you want best. So that's why you will only be discussing their daughter. You're not going to be discussing how you punish Susie. You're not going to be disclosing how are you going to handle incidents in the future. Okay, because all you're here to discuss is their daughter and what you are going to do to help their daughter. Okay, I would say things like she needs to come talk to me next time she feels Susie Q is bullying, and then we will deal with Susie Q. But you can't discuss what you are going to be doing because that could be a disciplinary record, and you can't disclose that information unless there's written consent from Susie's parents that you can discuss this with this other parent. So that is one thing that was how I would be to handle that scenario. Second scenario here. You're eating dinner with family friends who have a son in the high school you teach at. The league basketball tournament is coming up next week and their son is on the team. The star basketball player has a history of struggling to keep his grades up, and the parent asks you if he is going to be eligible for the big tournament this week. How would you respond? Again, you can't discuss grades with this parent. Even though they are very close family friends, you cannot discuss, legally you cannot discuss his grades. You can't say, oh, it's going to be, you just can't do that. You have to stay true, and you have to stay legally ethical so that you don't put your school district or you don't put USD 308 in a bind. Because if you do, that non-compliance comes into factor, and then we might lose some of our federal funding. So you have to make sure that I go back to that. I want what's best for your son, and so in the future, I'm not going to talk to other people about your son's educational or grades or test scores or anything like that. I'm only going to talk to parents about their particular kiddo. Hopefully they respect that enough and see that, hey, if he doesn't do that about the star basketball player, he doesn't talk to me about them, then I know down the road and have enough trust in this teacher that he's not going to talk about my son if my son has some issues or anything like that. So that would be how I would respond that. You're only here to talk about their kiddo unless they have written consent. You can't talk about other kids that are involved in the school. I hope you have become a little bit more educated about what FERPA stands for, what it means, and what your role is as an educator in this process. Thank you.